the smoke rings I blow each night. Oh,
Hi, I'm Johnny Weiser.
And I'm Oscar Houseman.
And you're listening to Professionally Cannabis. Oscar, what are we doing here?
Well, what we do is we interview leaders in the cannabis industry, cannabosses, if you will, the people who make it happen, CEOs, founders, people with a lot of power in this biz, and we find out what makes them tick.
Why are we doing this?
Not because we got high, but because this is a massive industry going to be probably about 50 billion within 10 years, according to most estimates. That's like Senkos, Prohibition Partners. I think Deloitte has a similar number. Everyone says it's going to be big. So let's find out who the people are who are making it big.
Now, dear listener, you've probably realised from our accents that we're from the UK. Yet, we're interviewing folks from North America, South America, and across Europe. The reason for that is the cannabis industry is increasingly becoming more and more global, so to give the international perspective from leaders across the world is totally needed. Oscar, who's this podcast for?
This podcast is for anyone who considers themselves to be a cannabis professional or is considering it. Also, I'd say for investors in this space and perhaps looking forward, maybe some of the consumers of products who want to know what goes behind the business ideas that drives the brands they love.
Exactly right.
And my mum, she'll love it.
I don't think my mum quite knows how to use her podcast app yet, so...
No, I'll be playing it to her.
We should get them together.
Well, I think that's enough chit-chat from us. The people are here to hear our guests. So, Johnny, who do we have today?
For today's interview, we're bringing you Jesse McConnell, CEO of Rubicon Organics. Now, this is one of my favourite interviews, and in addition to cannabis, jam gets a mentioned. Listeners, enjoy.
I'm Jesse McConnell, CEO of Rubicon Organics, and you're listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow each night. Oh, what do they do? Those circles of blue and white.
Our guest today is Jesse McConnell, CEO and founder of Rubicon Organics. They're one of only 2 listed organic cannabis companies, and they serve Washington, Canada, and California. In a previous life, Jesse was an economist and a philosopher, but now with 2 decades of cannabis experience under his belt, I'd say it's probably safe to say he's sticking with this one. Would you say that's correct, Jesse?
Oh, I'd say cannabis is all about philosophy and economics right now.
Now, to kick us off with a question we ask all our guests on Professionally Cannabis, what took you to the plant?
The route for me to the plant was twofold. One is the answer that everybody likes to give in the medical cannabis field, which is they had a relative and that relative ended up getting sick and then that relative used cannabis. For me, that actually is the truth. My father contracted a neurological disease, ALS, many years ago, and he did find that the use of cannabis was extremely helpful, and that certainly helped to continue to drive my passion for the plant and the industry. But prior to that, I also used it myself occasionally and quite enjoyed it and thought it was useful for managing things like pain and anxiety a little bit. And here in Canada, where it's recreationally legal, a nice way to unwind instead of a glass of wine. So I enjoy the cannabis plant for both myself and for the many benefits I saw it for my family and for my father.
So you've taken that small kernel and moved to become CEO of a listed company. What I'm really interested to know is, how does it feel to make that transition?
Well, it's been a slow transition. It's sort of the frog in a pot of water that slowly heats up. That's probably the best analogy I could use there. But in the beginning, we were just cultivating on a small scale and providing for patients, including my father. And then, of course, the commercially regulated industry came about, and that allowed for a much wider audience and for a much more sophisticated organization to be developed. But it was a lot of work, to get there. You can imagine in walking around in 2012 to the financial institutions, asking them for money to grow, in their mind, weed. They thought you were crazy.
It might be similar to Europe.
Well, certainly at this stage, they weren't able to see what a disruptive industry this is in so many areas, everything from alcohol to pharmaceutical to textiles. And, quite frankly, it was a grind in the beginning. And then over time, it became less so. The potential of the industry began to develop and the organization began to grow. And that includes my own professional development as I went from being a small scale entrepreneur to applying my educational background and my passion for the industry, building out a big team around me and learning what it is to manage a large organization and to be competitive on a global scale.
I think that having the right team behind you is incredibly key. What would you say is the thing that you look for when you're bringing in folks to your senior management team?
Well, I think the first thing we had to do was understand what we stood for and where we wanted to win. So it wasn't just about finding people with good-looking CVs. It was about making sure that we had people who were very professional, but not stuffy and boring. Because this is an industry where you have to manage a lot of risk and manage a lot of change. It's continually developing, right? So it's not something where we get to say, okay, well, this category needs to be managed in this sort of way. Therefore, a manager of a brand for Diageo, for instance, will fit perfectly in the hard spirits category. It's constantly evolving. So we needed people who could be flexible like that and could put in some really, really long hours. And we picked them from a number of different fields. Now we've got a well-rounded team from finance, from legal, from big-scale CPG, a little bit on the medical side. Obviously, we're strong on the agricultural side, but cannabis is such a broad spectrum.
And it's good that you mentioned the agricultural side, because I feel you've got an interesting story there. What drove you to organic production wasn't necessarily the organic certification itself, but the fact that it drove a better yield, as I understand it. Could you talk more to that?
I think I actually began with the quality. As one of the few CEOs in the industry who's going to openly admit to using cannabis and enjoying it, I want to consume a high quality product. And one of the analogies I like to make is, it's kind of like your grandmother's strawberry jam. You can go to the grocery store and you can buy, mass produced strawberry jam on the shelf. But when you go to your grandma's house and she's got those nice preserves there, that's a different level of quality. And organic cannabis is the same way. When I then realized that we could do organic cannabis at that quality level and do it on scale, that's when I got really excited about it. And then we spent some time developing out that fertility program and being able to apply that on scale. We ended up, at the end of that, achieving yields that were as good or better than hydroponic. And so now we're in the unique position to be able to grow a very high quality plant and do that for less cost than you do conventionally. And that's not what you normally see in agricultural production.
Are you still at 50 cents a gram? Because that's quite a headline figure.
Well, we're working toward that. So that's really something that we still need to truly prove out to the marketplace. We're expecting to achieve that number in the next 12 months.
Good to hear. So when we're talking about scale, I noticed the EU GMP certification. So obviously for us in Europe, that's very exciting because it suggests that you're looking to enter our market.
Yeah, I have to be careful how I discuss that, but we're certainly very excited about the European marketplace. We see this as a global disruptive industry, and even setting aside the recreational component of that now. When you look at how CBD has captured the imagination of the wellness categories, we can't not be excited about a market as large as Europe. But what Europe is looking for is, I believe, different than what some of the North American markets are looking for. Europe, for better or worse, loves their regulation. So we believe that as it becomes evident that cannabis is really going to be embraced by Europe, that it's important to be GMP certified this year. I mean, it's still going to take a minute for Europe to develop, but it also takes a few years to really build the trust with the regulators, develop the channels into those marketplaces. So we want to start early to make sure that we are there and ready when the market begins to flourish.
Do you have any particular countries or regions within Europe that you think is worth focusing attention as a company?
Well, I mean, clearly the ones that actually have medical programs are the ones to begin with, starting with Germany. Of course, there's medical coverage there. I don't know what the current patient counts are, but it's certainly something that you see is going to be precipitous, as we've seen here in Canada. Doctors are reluctant to prescribe cannabis in the beginning because they don't understand it inside of their Western models. So it takes some time until that comfort level is reached and the doctors are educated to the point that they become comfortable prescribing it. But once that happens, we see kind of a wave of prescriptions and patients. So where we have focused our efforts initially is on Germany. And, we believe that the Danish market actually is going to be a nice market there, that there's some strong life sciences companies working out of Denmark.
And strong governmental encouragement as well, I believe.
That's right. So it is about working with countries that have got strong regulation that are going to create the foundation for scale later. Obviously the UK is going to be a huge market, but all these will take time. Most important to establish some beachheads in the European Union, create the right facilities so that you're ready to scale as opposed to just running in and trying to scale right away.
Absolutely. And I think on the regulators and education point, there's an interesting debate here about how should consumers and patients learn or understand cannabis, and where should that information come from? Companies, physicians, or regulators indeed?
Well, you're asking somebody from the industry, so you can expect that my answer will be stronger on the industry side. But I think that, at the same time, what's really important here is that we have to encourage responsible cannabis use. It's important to consume this in a socially responsible way and to educate the consumers and the doctors as to what the benefits are and to what some of the pitfalls are. So to that end, we've joined a group called the Global Cannabis Partnership. It tries to create a socially responsible framework for use, and it's a big part about education. And inside of that group, we're trying to encourage stakeholders that are outside of just private industry to become a part of that and to engage with us, because if we have a message that's coming from a number of different sectors, then you're going to have the trust with the consumer and the trust with the medical community. If it's specifically coming from private industry only, that's going to be profit motivated. If it's specifically coming from regulators, they're going to try to make it as simple as possible for them to check their boxes. So everybody's got their own motivations. But if we come together and we talk about a framework, I think you can end up with still a robust, strong industry, and you'll have a consumer who understands the type of products and what the benefits and detriments could be to using the various products.
Touching on the topic of regulations, I guess one of the things that everyone that works in cannabis space has to battle with almost daily is the complexity and diversity of the nature of the regulatory landscape. How does that impact how you market your company and your products between regions?
The regulations in cannabis are extremely intense. Anybody getting into this industry who isn't prepared to have a small army of people working on compliance and regulation will struggle. And I think that the industry, in a sense, is overregulated, but in another sense, this truly is a disruptive force, economically and societally. And from the point of view of government and regulations, they have to make sure that this is safe. They have to make sure that they are putting in place the right checks and balances. Well, at the same time, as it becomes better known and we become more educated on that, they're able to roll back some of those regulations.
Yeah, well, I think many of us in this space feel that cannabis probably doesn't deserve to be as highly regulated as substances that have been shown to be much more harmful. But something I wanted to circle back to was your point on the disruptive nature of cannabis, because you mentioned it a couple of times. So I want to make sure we get your full futurist view on where the disruption is going to strike.
It's going to strike across so many categories. I think it's actually unbelievable. We've already seen that happen in alcohol. And of course, major players have pointed to cannabis as a real threat to their market share. If I think of my college days, the way that we encounter alcohol certainly wasn't fully socially responsible. And I think you're seeing a movement away from that with young people today who are less interested in binge drinking on the weekends and are turning to cannabis as a much healthier alternative. And, they don't get to make all the terrible decisions that I got to make when I was younger.
Poor them.
Poor them, indeed. But we can all attest to the way, you feel on a Sunday morning after one of those kind of evenings. And you don't get any of those kind of issues with cannabis. So I do believe that's one place that will be extremely disruptive, is in that recreational component. And then that, if we move into the wellness category, the same applies. And then we see it being applied more in the pharmaceutical category across, so many different illnesses and disease. When I was working in the old Canadian medical program, I had a patient who had terrible rheumatoid arthritis in his fingers. To the point that, he would have trouble opening his hands and being able to even grasp small objects. And so he would use cannabis. He would just make it into a topical, and he'd then put that lotion into a glove, and he could put his hand in the glove, and 30 minutes later, from having that lotion applied, he could pick up and you use pencils and do all kinds of things that he couldn't even come close to doing before. But because he had to throw the rest of his body, he'd also have to take very heavy doses of opioids, which meant he had almost no appetite. But when he was able to use cannabis as an alternative, his quality of life dramatically improved because he's not having kidney issues because of the opioids. He's not having the same nausea issues. He's able to, his appetite could return. So across those three categories, so you've got pharmaceutical, you've got wellness and CPG, and you've got, alcohol and recreational psychoactives that we use every day in our society. Now, those are just three major categories I can think you can see cannabis becoming extremely disruptive.
Good. And I can certainly say that I've seen the arthritic response from topicals, even in, I suppose you'd call them black market preparations in the UK from people I've spoken to anecdotally. So I'm looking forward to the point when they can actually get it at the pharmacist.
I'm looking forward to selling it to the pharmacist so you can come pick it up.
So let's talk about more your products, because I think, do you lead with the 1964 brand that's more in the recreational space, lovely artist branding, that sort of vibe? But do you do medical as well, or have ambitions, especially in Europe?
I don't think we bring a recreational brand to Europe. A lot of the form factors will translate between recreational and wellness, all right? So if you're using a vape for anxiety, there's no reason you couldn't be using that vape for recreational as well. So you have a lot of the same products, the same innovation, but applying to different segments. We do a host of different products in that area, but when we come into Europe, it's going to be less focused on a flower product, which we do find to be more of the recreational consumer who really appreciates spending that extra margin on a high quality flower product. An example could be wine here. I've got many friends who are happy to spend $12 on a bottle of wine. Then I have other friends who spend $30, $40 on a bottle of wine, and they really enjoy their wine. And we believe that is the same way with the cannabis consumer. And you'll see that quality of flower is really important to the consumers who really appreciate that. And then there's a number of consumers who, not they don't appreciate that, it's just not as important to them. So they're happy to take a lower grade at a lower price point, which to them still satisfies their same, need-based states. So we really see us focusing on extremely high quality flower for a portion of that market. But we think a lot of our market is also going to really gravitate toward organic products. And because that's something we do really, really well, we'll have our kind of reserve product, our flower, our extremely high quality flower for our flower consumer. And then our really darn good quality flower, which I still think will be better than 95% of what's out there, will be used for more of our value add products.
And let's talk about what's out there, because I assume you predominantly enjoy Rubicon products, but are there any competitors out there who you think are doing good things, smart things, producing stuff that you also really enjoy?
I think the competitors that are doing well are the companies that have decided to focus on an area and try to win in that area. And in Canada, there's been a lot of hype, and that hype is dying down. And now companies need to deliver on the promises that they've made to the industry and to their shareholders. And a lot of them now are suddenly learning that it's actually quite hard to grow high quality cannabis on scale. So you have companies who've promised everything from the highest quality flower to the best oil to we're going to make dog food and we're going to make the highest quality flower, the Bordeaux of cannabis. And I'm just trying to think of another company that sells Bordeaux and also sells dog food. Doesn't seem to be a good branding strategy to me, but I like the companies that have found an area and focused on that area. Try to do one thing really, really well. And so for us, growing a really high quality flower, and from there, we now have a base that you can create other products from. But you got to start with something where you can win. So those are the companies that I respect.
Are we going to have professionals like cannabis equivalent to wine sommeliers coming in? I
think we already have those in the market. Certainly, you went to Spanibus this year or Hall of Flowers in California. There are a number of great events where people who are extremely passionate about the product are there to judge, consume, and enjoy the various things that are on offer.
Yeah, the extracts was eye-opening for me because it's not such a big part of the European scene, but things like the Masters of Rosin in Barcelona really showed off what's out there.
Well, it accounts for the same by sales volume as flower in California. And so that's that same kind of example when you ask, who do you respect out there? The companies that are not working with high quality partners and just trying to put mid-grade concentrate out, don't respect so much. But the ones that started with really high quality flower, the masters of rosin, and then they've taken that high quality flower and made an amazing, flavorful, exciting product out of that. Those are the companies that I think will last long term and build market share and capture the imagination of the consumer.
For folks currently in industry, just starting out or even looking to get in, what would you say is your greatest lesson that you've learned from your career so far? I'm sure you've got a few war stories.
A number of war stories. Raising money is very difficult, and you better have a really well thought out business plan before you come to the market asking for money. Don't just say, all I need is the money. Because what you really need is a really well thought out, really well designed plan. You got to build a team around you that can execute on that plan and overestimate the amount of time that it's going to take, because it's probably going to take twice as long as that.
And do you invest in any of these guys that you see coming up with solid business plans, great teams? Do you hold shares in other cannabis companies?
Well, obviously Rubicon's the only company worth holding shares in.
We'll play that sound on loop.
Yeah, perfect. I do invest in some other companies, obviously not ones that are competitive with us, but ones that have a solid plan that I think could be synergistic with the type of things that we're doing. And it's such a large market. Like Rubicon isn't going to be a company that's going to be in every single one of these sectors. It just doesn't, that's not how you can grow a realistic company. I like seeing guys who are building a fantastic GMP certified extraction facility in a marketplace that we're interested in, and they've got a very bioavailable innovation that's going to work great in soft gels. I'm like, great, you guys are going to win in that little area.
It sounds like you're building them up in order to partner with them. You're sort of trying to create a company that you want to work with.
Well, I would say yes and no. I will invest in companies that I think can make it on their own. I'm very careful about investing in any company that Rubicon may partner in the future to make sure that there is no conflicts of interest. We are a public company, very careful about making sure we are well governed and well managed and extremely transparent about every transaction. So I will invest in a company on its own merits. And then if we look to partner with them in the future, I would be sure to disclose anything around those kinds of previous investments. But there is something to be said for some risk capital in a small facility to see if they can move the ball forward, so to speak, that could later become a good partner.
Are there any companies in Europe that you see that are particularly exciting?
There are a couple of companies in Europe that I do like, but I don't think it would be appropriate for me to share those right now, given the fact that Rubicon, may end up working with them, and that none of that's public right now.
Well, if you want to invite them to be on the podcast completely independently, that would always be okay as well.
Well, I'm happy once those disclosures are out there. I just came back from a whirlwind trip of Europe, and there are some good companies over there. It's a different environment, I think, than what we've seen here in Canada. The companies that I've had the opportunity to meet with, the majority of them were quite professional, and they were operators. They're focused on building long-term sustainable businesses, working with partners that can help accelerate their learning curve and steepen their learning curve, but they aren't playing the hype machine game played over here in Canada, where there are great operators here in Canada for sure. But there's a number of companies that are essentially corporate marketing companies that drive their share price on that basis, but there's not a lot of substance behind them. So I really enjoyed my European experience, because you're finding people who want to build real businesses and want to affect real change, and they're not just in it for the money. So I really enjoyed that.
Did you notice any other differences between European companies and Canadian ones? What's the cannabis professional experience like, and how does it differ?
Well, the cannabis professional experience is that there's no legacy operators over there. We did meet one or two cannabis legacy operators, and I think it's fair to say I won't be partnering with those guys. The way that it's developed in Canada had been, only a few legacy operators were able to make the transition to a new marketplace. And in any frenzied bubble environment, the majority of the operators in the space, you can imagine, are the kind of snake oil salesman type guys, because they see an opportunity where you can sell air. Europe isn't experiencing that frenzy. There's still a lot of hype for good reason that the market's going to be quite large, but the ability to be a bit of a shyster, a bit of a huckster, is no longer really available. a lot of the individuals I met were ex-MBA, coming out of logistics or coming out of legal, a lot of pharmaceutical guys who were looking to get into space, ex-corporate guys looking to become entrepreneurs, and those are some really good professionals.
Yeah, and I think that opens up an interesting question on European cannabis operators, because we see a big divide between legacy operators who generally have ponytails and beards and a lot of love for the plant, and newer corporate guys who maybe have come around to it because of the economics rather than a deep love for it. Now that creates some debate here. What would you say the skew is of experience that you need to run a successful company?
Well, I mean, I don't think you need to have a deep love for the plant, but I think you have to have a deep love for entrepreneurship and business. And the people who are going to be successful are going to be the teams who really want to deliver something to the consumer, right? They genuinely want to build real businesses. I think that the legacy experience in Europe will have some importance, but it'll have less because cannabis professionals now can tap into the fact that there's been a legal marketplace for the last 3 to 5 years, depending on the country. My 20 years experience was particularly valuable because I just fundamentally understand the industry in the plant, and I've got relationships, obviously, that go back quite far. As the industry has developed, I now have professionals on my team who've been with me for a few years. That talent is now out there more, so you're able to go find that in a different way. You're not as reliant on a legacy grower as you were, say, 5 years ago.
When it comes to Europe, how important is it that for many of our operators, they've had previous experience within the Canadian market?
I don't think it's a necessity that the European operators have Canadian experience, but one of the things that the Canadian experience offers is we've had a number of years to work through these regulations. And I can tell you that if you asked me 4 years ago what my business would look like, it wouldn't have been what it looks like today. There's so many lessons to learn. It's a very complicated industry. So if you can have the advantage of working with a Canadian licensed producer, you're going to accelerate your business tremendously.
How do you differentiate the Canadian experience from, say, the American experience?
Well, the Canadian experience fits into the European experience much better than the American experience. But that's largely, I think, because our societies are not terribly different. We are a fairly regulated society over here. We really focus on consumer safety. There's a lot of bureaucracy for better or for worse, but that regulation mirrors the European experience. The American experience is much different. It's a marketing-heavy, capitalist-focused experience, which allows them to move quickly, and they have some advantages on that. But the regulations and the oversight is very weak. In fact, I think when my European colleagues go to some of the U.S. operations, they are appalled by what they see and what the Americans are allowed to get away with. The Americans are not used to working in those kind of strictly regulated environments. They will tell you that they are, but what is required is a much, much lower bar than what the Canadian experience is.
And talking of experiences, you guys produce super high quality organic plant. What gives you the edge over everyone else in the market?
Well, we spoke about it earlier that organic product is something that stands out and differentiates itself. And, I don't need to tell you about cannabis and why that differentiates in cannabis. You just need to look at, your grocery aisle and the extent to which the organic sector has moved across, every piece of produce that you can imagine. Blueberries is my favorite example. There's something like 110% margin increase on organic blueberries over non-organic.
Wow.
So I should be in blueberries. And thankfully, we have 15 acres of blueberries out of the back of our greenhouse facility, which if you've never eaten blueberries off the vine, by the way, is an experience that you should definitely indulge in. It's quite fantastic. I'll treat you to that if you come visit our facility this summer.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
So there's the price margin, that's significant, and the quality, but in a sector that as it evolves, and you want to win in an area, we're talking about 2 publicly listed certified organic companies in Canada, of which we're one. And then you've got 100 other producers producing conventional product. It's much easier to produce that conventional product. As the production side of the supply chain increases, the vast majority of them are going to produce a conventional product. And as you can imagine, you're going to see price pressure in those areas. So, we want to focus on what we think, first of all, is a higher quality product. Secondly, is has significantly higher margins. And thirdly, isn't going to have the same level of competition in that space, because doing certified organic production at scale is difficult to do. So I think for all those reasons, the organic space is going to thrive, and those that are focused on that are going to have a better go than those that are not.
Interesting. So what is it that makes producing organic at scale such a barrier to entry? I mean, I've got a layman's understanding, but I'd like to hear it from a pro.
Well, there's a couple of things. A lot of the hygiene practices are some differences in organic, because we just don't get to use any of the nasty chemicals, which means that we've got to be stricter with our hygiene. We've got to have stricter quality standards. But one of the biggest things is creating a cultivation system, and by that I mean things like soils and fertilizers, that are able to drive the growth in the plant at the same rates as you can do hydroponically. I guess a good way to think about that would be, if you're trying to put on muscle mass, one way to do that is to eat lots of good grass-fed organic beef, and another way to do that is to jab a needle in your arm and pump yourself up full of steroids. Both are effective. Steroids might be a little more effective, but there's a number of downsides to doing that as well.
Less tasty.
Certainly less tasty. When you're just pouring hydroponic salt-based fertilizers over the raw roots, it's an effective way to grow a plant, but it lacks a lot of the nuances that make that create that quality, right? So I'll give you that one more example. Back to your grandmother's strawberry jam. So you go into the backyard, and she's got a lovely strawberry bush there, and she can grow a nice little organic plant down there. No problem. She'll do a great job. When you need to scale that, you've got to start finding a lot of raw material input to provide the levels of nutrition that you need for the amount of product that we're growing. So we have a facility on the Sunshine Coast here in British Columbia, where we source a lot of our fertilizer products from. And there is a giant biofilter at the top, and inside are tens of thousands of rotting salmon carcasses. We have a lot of fish here on the West Coast, and a great source of fantastic nitrogen is salmon, and it's a very sustainable. You don't want to visit that facility, by the way, if you come over here this summer. I'll spare you that experience.
I'll take the blueberries over salmon any day.
You don't want 10,000 rotting salmon carcasses? You don't want to spend some time around that? The blueberries are much nicer, but that's what I mean by the scale. It's a lot of dead fish and all kinds of other raw materials to feed these different kinds of plants. That's one of the biggest challenges.
Great.
So I'm going to ask you to be Nostradamus and look into a crystal ball of sorts. Do you have any cannabis predictions for 2019 that might not be so widely discussed at the moment?
Certainly the Canadian experience, everybody's made a lot of promises. Now it's time to execute on these business models. And I do think that a number of Canadian facilities will fail to deliver those, because they put their money into corporate marketing and promotion and not into operations and building real businesses. So I think you'll see a little bit of catastrophe happening in some of the Canadian producers. But at the same time, the ones that have kept their heads down, that have focused on executing, you're going to see the emergence of some of those brands in the Canadian market. And they're going to take some real market share.
So this is the year when the hype game comes back to bite people.
Yeah, you can only scream that you're the best in the world from the mountaintops for so long. So I do think that it's time to prove. And I think you're going to see some really large American companies come together. So you'll see some of the Canadian guys get a run for their money from the U.S. competitors. And I think that you'll see Germany open up just a little bit this year, that you'll see that patient count really start to ramp up, because a lot of guys have been focusing on trying to get into that market. And I think you'll also see a bit of a domino effect as the first year of Canadian legalization gets dealt with. There's a lot of voices in American Congress to do something about changing marijuana laws in the U.S. That chorus is going to have ripple effects in Europe. And Europe is going to start saying, okay, look, this really isn't as dangerous as you guys have made it out to be. We have a huge market here. There's no supply chain figured out in Europe in any way. Remember, in North America, we've had a very established marketplace, especially here on the West Coast in British Columbia and California for a long time. But in the European Union, the organizations that have been working there have been much more criminal, much more hardcore criminal. So I think there may be a rallying cry here to say, look, let's take it out of the hands of the criminals and let's start putting it in the hands of the professionals. There's a professional cannabis industry out there now. Let's work with it. Let's develop that. And let's start sowing the seeds for normalization in Europe. And I think you're going to see a big chorus of that happening by the end of the year.
And do you think as that industry becomes more professional, it won't feel as fun anymore? Because I got to say, I love the conferences as they are.
Well, no, I mean, I agree. My last conference I went to, it was mainly guys in $500 loafers and fancy suits, and that was a bit disappointing. But that's how the industry is going to shift. But it doesn't mean that the consumer shifts, right? I think that's the thing that we have to remember. While new players or new consumers will enter into the marketplace, the old consumer is not going anywhere. They've been enjoying this product their whole lives. And so it can still be a hell of a lot of fun. But when it gets into that really, really global dominated supply chain, and we're 15 years down the road and it's a very mature marketplace, I think I'll be ready to take my exit then.
Quick thing for our audience, Jesse. What's the one product from your line, strain, anything like that they should try?
I'm old school. I'm a flower guy, and we have an organic Blue Dream that we have been breeding over the last 5 or 6 years that is truly out of this world.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to recommend that and also your grandma's strawberry jam.
Thanks for being on the show, Jesse.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure, guys. Really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you, and look forward to giving you an update in the months to come.
Take care, Jesse.
Thanks a lot.
You.
Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Well, we hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, remember to like and subscribe or leave a review. And join us next week when we'll be interviewing one of the largest fund managers of a cannabis fund in Europe. Did I say fund enough there, Johnny?
I'll see if I can match it in next week's outro. Anyway, that's enough from us. Until next week's Professionally Cannabis, have a great week.
Please take me above, take me with you.